And hello from Sydney, and welcome to the Proof of Concept podcast, the tech show where we explore real life use cases from the field and discuss those hot questions in data science and AI. I am your host, Grant Case, RVP for Sales Engineering here for Dataiku and APJ. And here in season 3 of the Proof of Concept podcast, we have had our eye on 2026. Funny, 2026 is just a little over 2 years away, and that means half of the 20s are now gone. To get ready, though, for the back half of this decade, we've focused this podcast season on what you can learn, understand, experience in order to best prepare yourself for the coming changes in the marketplace, whether you're just starting out your career or you're a seasoned executive. Today's episode, we're going to focus on your career and how you can future-proof your career with AI and do that. And to do that, my guest today is a gentleman who's been reinventing himself many times over during his career. Today's guest is Shaun McGirr. Shaun is the field CDO for the EMEA region here at Dataiku. But by my count in his LinkedIn, he's had north of 7 different careers since coming to Dataiku. But more importantly, he's here to help us chat about how we can use AI to future-proof our career rather than having it disrupt it. So, welcome to the Proof of Concept podcast, Shaun.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for counting up those changes even within Dataiku. If you keep going further back, you'll find even more.
Fantastic. So, here at the Proof of Concept podcast, we try to break things down A, B, C, D, E style. And really, for the kind of the start of this discussion in our abstract, let's talk a little bit about what is all of this AI stuff about? More importantly, how are we going to use AI to start to really think about and improve our career, Shaun?
I think what we're seeing a lot of right now from Dataiku is a lot of interest from people who've pretty deep in their careers about how to apply maybe the latest and greatest version of AI, generative AI, large language models, and all of that. And that's all well and good. What isn't quite there yet is kind of very reliable use cases and tangible business value in every industry, right? So people are naturally jumping forward and saying, how can I use this latest, greatest tech to change something about the business? And part of the reason for all those, career evolutions that I've had is that I think it's really good to apply technology to yourself before you go out and try and apply it to other people. So I've been thinking a lot recently, how could I have done things differently if I'd had the tools that are available now? How could I have accelerated making myself obsolete, right? Ever since I started working with data, I really wanted to not do the same task or job twice, right? And that's just a personality trait more than anything. But I think it's
you can never move up if nobody knows how to do your job, you'll never move up, right?
Yeah, and it can feel really risky and a little dangerous. But what I found doing that early on was people don't get rid of you when you're the one to automate part of your job. They give you more responsibility. They give you a tougher question or a tougher problem. Eventually, they give you a team, and that's what human careers are about, right? Developing in the right direction that you want. And if AI can help us do that, then we need to take advantage of it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And again, I think one of the things I always talk about to young people that are coming up to me and kind of asking my career is like, hey, you got to automate yourself out of a job in a lot of different times. If you want to ever move up, you want to move on, you've got to do that. And really, I think AI has, especially as we've seen stuff with ChatGPT, what we're seeing things with Midjourney, there's absolutely a lot of ways you can start to help not necessarily having the AI disrupt your own career, but you disrupting your career. So in kind of this B block, we talk about breaking this down. So how do we, how do we explain this like it's 5? So how would you kind of go about speaking to, let's say, a seasoned executive today who's asking you about AI and what it does for their career? You've obviously having these sorts of conversations right now. So how are you kind of constructing that conversation?
Let's actually approach it from the other end of career development. So
Okay.
I actually had a Dataiku event the other week, or an event where
Mhm.
we were presenting. Different school groups came around different booths
Ah,
of
oh,
vendors
even better,
with their
even better.
teachers. Yeah, yeah. And so they were, what is this thing? What is my teacher dragged me to? What is AI? And I started with the simple question with each group: who's using ChatGPT to help them with their homework, right? And
Mhm,
some of them put up their hands, and the teacher knew it was going on, and the teacher has to adjust to that. So it's already being used by late high school kids. But when
mhm,
we talked about what they should study, how they should think about their career, that's the question that the teacher threw in the pot. Was what I was able to say now, which wasn't so clear to me 2 3 years ago necessarily, is it probably matters less and less what specific technical things that you might study. But if you come out of school, if you go into higher education of any kind with some applied skills, any kind of technical field, and any
mhm,
kind of humanities, social science thing, you're going to be okay, right?
mhm,
Because what AI is going to take away is a lot of artisanal technical work that did require highly specialized people. That will always be there to the rest of time. But these kind of 17-year-old kids, it was quite freeing for me to be able to say, it doesn't matter so much what you study, but how you study it and how you approach it.
mhm,
That's the thing that's going to make you robust to all these
mhm,
changes over time. So I would probably say to a senior executive a very similar thing. And when
mhm.
you could say the same thing to a senior executive as you're saying to 17-year-old high schoolers, it's a pretty interesting time.
I would say that's what's the old Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times. And I think in this case, we are living in a very interesting time for
Absolutely.
many of us.
Yeah.
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 So let's talk a little bit about that. I think one of the things I hear a lot about, especially when it comes to AI, is this just another fad?
Mm,
Even AI itself had a moment in the '80s and kind of petered out, and because we weren't at that point in time. But if I'm looking at even my career when I started, I was talking a little bit about I was doing application development, and I kind of got into this data elements. Uh, like many of us, just kind of,
yeah.
oh, you like database? Yeah, go work on the database. I
Hmm.
wasn't
Hmm.
much of a I wasn't much of an app developer, but I
Mm,
did, I knew my way around the database itself. So can you kind of compare and contrast this moment we're having with AI, both maybe from a historic sense of kind of these different changes we've seen in the
mm.
marketplace today, and then what's unique and what's the same?
Yeah. So a year ago, I was pretty skeptical about this moment that we're now in. I was like, okay, generated art, that's fine. I'm not going to put any fantasy themed pictures on my wall anytime soon, and I'd
Not a
probably
Mid
rather
Journey
pay a
fan, huh?
human. No, I mean it's, and then now I've seen it do some amazing stuff. One of the things that changed my mind about that was one of the event companies that we work with in Europe. All of its designers are now using Mid Journey to generate much more innovative and interesting visuals to go along with the events that they are advertising. So it's shifting the
Mhm,
job of designers. That was one of the things that convinced me this moment is different. And then when I just started to see how natural some of the conversation with ChatGPT can be, that's another thing that tipped the scales and made me think it's different. But this moment is interesting because compared to the winter, I really think we have passed a threshold in terms of availability of data and computation and methods that have made some things possible that even a couple of years ago, of course, OpenAI was working on this for 10 years, right? But
yep,
even people in the field, people like you and me a couple of years ago, would have probably predicted that these things that are now possible for kind of anyone with an internet connection to use would have been further out than now. So, and that's, but that happens with all technological innovations and change. So often the things that we predict or maybe want the most happen later.
mhm,
Some unexpected things happen a little earlier. I think what's really helping me get my head around it is a book I'm reading called Prediction Machines by some University of Toronto economists. Highly recommend it for anyone that's not technical, but it
Mhm.
does help fill in for technical people how this is different but also similar to other changes in technology. And the big takeaway from that book is that what AI is doing in general, and I think the book was written before this moment,
Mhm.
but what AI is doing in general is reducing the cost of prediction. And
Mhm.
when you reduce the cost of prediction, and I think we've passed a threshold in the cost of some kinds of predictions now with the availability of these large language models, that's just an economic shift that will change business models, individual productivity, careers, and lots of things. So the technology is really cool and interesting and everything, but the way that I'm making sense of it for myself is trying to think through, okay, when the costs of certain kinds of predictions, especially conversational
Mhm.
predictions, drops not to zero but much lower, what does that change about what we can achieve? And that helps us put it in a bit more reasonable, probably historical perspective, and focus also on what will be the short term value gains from applying this in specific use cases rather than overselling this moment as the solution to absolutely everything.
Mhm. 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 And it's funny. I completely agree with what you're talking about there. It, I kind of come back to something you said earlier, which is kind of I remember at the very start of this, these changes when we're kind of comparing and contrasting is the changes I did not expect we would be here at this point. If you asked me maybe about 2 years ago, would we be at this point? I would say no. But you said something very interesting. OpenAI has been doing this for the last 10 years. Bill Gates has a great quote. He says, people overestimate what's possible in 2 years, but they underestimate what's possible in a decade. And
Mm,
we're kind of at this point in time. If I'm reflecting on my own career and you know, I'm having a lot of people interact with me. Again, this is stuff that people all want to talk about right now.
mhm,
It's, it feels very much the theme of data uh,
mm,
hasn't changed. So when I kind of compare and contrast what we're seeing right now, the theme of data rules all. In the case of AI, it's even more important
mhm,
necessarily than what we're doing in machine learning and your typical tabular data. But it's almost it's even more so important. So it's this concept and idea. If you're following the data, you follow the river, you're going to get to the ocean at some point
mm,
in time, and it feels like very much that. Uh, I don't, and I don't think I've anticipated where it's really different for me in this is, in fact, the speed. The speed. You and I are both part of an expert AI group inside of Dataiku, and this stuff's changing on a weekly basis
yeah.
at this point, which makes our jobs really interesting at this point. But I think
Very
to me,
interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
this,
you're
yeah,
right about the continuity of that data theme, though. So that yes, the speed is terrifying in some ways, exhilarating in others.
mhm,
What it is helping uh, people who want to do this, including us, what's helping us all highlight is some of the needs to do foundational things right.
mhm.
Right. So that's what I've been talking to data leaders about recently. Is not I don't know all the use cases. No one knows them yet.
No,
But what I've been imploring data leaders and other executives to do is not waste the moment, right? So the moment has generated so much interest in this new kind of AI, not to waste the moment of that elevated interest and maybe some slightly suspended disbelief to make those critical points about do we want to build this ourselves or should we use someone else's? Do we have the data
mm,
to support that? Are our processes robust that this thing won't get out of control and cost us
mhm,
tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in fines from a regulatory regime that has not yet been written or adapted? So
mm,
I completely agree, and that's tough, right? How do you
yeah,
keep motivated on the new technology, but also use it to solve good old fashioned problems which haven't changed that much over
yeah.
the decades?
So, and we'd love to hear your use cases. What are you reading? Please follow us here on the Proof of Concept podcast here
Fill us in.
on YouTube, LinkedIn, and anywhere you get your podcasts. We'd love to hear your and let's keep the conversation going. So, Shaun, when we think about our careers, you and I are toward, we're experienced, seasoned executives at this point in time. But what's the value? How do you think a lot of what AI is going to contribute over you know, the next 2.5 to 3 years to a lot of the careers of the individuals? I'm almost excited for if you're new in your career or just coming out. I'd be both petrified and incredibly excited about what AI could do for me.
Yeah, exactly. And that was brought home to me when 20 high school kids turned up at that booth, and I was put on the spot about what should they do, and that's why it was exciting and liberating to be able to not feel obligated to push them into STEM or coding.
Mhm,
Not everyone. It was already true. Not everyone needed to learn how to write code and program. And if this new wave of AI makes that more accessible, that's probably a good thing. I do think back to a lot of things that were hard for me to do, not having a programming background or any kind of computer science background in my career, because I, like many other people, got into this data thing a little bit like you.
mhm.
Hey, you seem to be the person interested in answering questions, so
Yeah,
here's some complicated questions and here's some
go away.
data, and go at it and come back when you have um, answers. And I think if we think about what large language models are really good at, they're really good at understanding the concepts behind human language. And when I think about the workflow, the data value chain, how people getting into data now get into data, what has changed compared to 20 years ago? The training is ubiquitous, the tools are so accessible, the entry barrier is lower than it has ever been. What I still think, though, is that data people and the data people as a community can be a little bit tribal in our knowledge. There's a little bit still of, well, unless you've got your scars doing this or that, you're not really
Mhm.
one of us, which any group does that. Any group uses its collective shared experiences to
Yeah, yeah.
include some people and exclude others.
Exclude others. Yep.
Yeah, and I think large language models might help break down some of those last barriers of, if you're at some point in your data career, at least today, it's likely that at some point some DBA database administrator is going to hand you an entity relationship diagram or some convoluted diagram of how some data flows or is linked together, and maybe give you a sample of data and say, good luck, work all that out for yourself. And I spent weeks and sometimes months trying to stitch together across different enterprise data sources, like, how does this all work together, and is this column really like this other column? And I think the power of these language models can maybe cut through some of that um, pain quite quickly. So I'm really
Mhm,
excited to see what new products, what new approaches, how people turn the work that we do and the way that we do data work a little bit on its head. For me,
mhm,
that you know, to democratize that aspect of it, right? Not just here's some tools, but to make it possible for a new data person to get their head around the complexity of enterprise data.
mhm.
That would be a massive value multiplier for the people who employ them and for the people in those careers themselves.
Yeah, and for me, when I think about that, I'd echo a lot of those points in terms of a lot of that value of the AI. I'm almost so, especially for even those that may be tangential. I think of uh, those individuals, maybe statisticians, or if you're doing things in mechanical engineering or any
Mm,
of the you know, any place where there might be data, but data is not necessarily your job.
mm.
Uh, I think there's going to be an incredible amount of potential to help
Mhm.
with there. So when I think
Yeah,
about,
bringing those people in the tent, on the boat, whatever your favorite metaphor. And then the great thing about so many of those fields and kind of the convergence of where that talent is coming from, but also where the data opportunity lies, to go back to, it's about the data.
Mhm,
The most interesting things that I'm seeing people organize themselves to do right now are about using LLMs to unlock new sources of data. And if you think about
mhm,
those manufacturing, those pharmaceutical, there is a ton of additional value in really unstructured data that has just, it's been too hard to capture. The investment to squeeze more signal out of that has been too high in the past. And one example that I've been discussing with a customer is the maintenance records for aircraft, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of that is heavily regulated. There's a lot of forms that are filled out that create highly structured data, but there's also the engineer's notes that they write standing in front of a plane. And all those notes are written in English. But the way that a German aircraft engineer standing in Germany writes their notes in English is different than the way that someone in Glasgow might do it. And so there's an incredible wealth, I think, of unstructured data collected and stored thanks to big data that not a lot of stuff was done with it, if I'm
Yeah.
honest. And if LLMs help us get more people working on that data with the domain expertise and create value from it, that will be a massive win. And to me, much more interesting than, oh, how do we further automate the call center, which is already highly
Yeah.
automated
Automated to
after,
begin with.
after decades. Yeah.
So we'd love to hear kind of what you think the value, where a lot of these use cases. Please follow us here on YouTube, LinkedIn, and of course anywhere you're getting the Proof of Concept podcast. Tell us about what sort of use cases do you see? Where do you think the value is going to be? So, Shaun, as we come to the end of the podcast, I'm going to put you on the spot and put your thinking cap on, prognosticator's cap, and tell us, you know, where do we go from here with AI in terms of helping future proof? Where do we need to be thinking about in the next 2 to 3 years?
Very good question. We just talked about how bad those predictions can be, but you've put me on the spot, so I will make a prediction. So I think over the next 6 months, a year, all those generative AI task forces that are going on in enterprises are going to find some stuff. And it's going to be a little bit interesting, but a little bit disappointing. So I anticipate a bit of an autumn or fall moment eventually to hit everyone who's trying it. That's just part of any technology adoption. And in a couple of years, I do believe that this will just be another tool in the enterprise toolkit for solving problems. I would really love it to be a tool in the overall digital toolkit, right? Not just data people having to push this on the rest of the business. It would be amazing if people designing digital customer experiences were able to leverage this technology as well, and for it to not just be within the data people. And then for the data people, what I say, in 2 years, it's not necessarily going to be okay for you to say, well, we're not really for AI. We're going to predict stuff later. If this stuff is dropping the cost of prediction markedly, you don't want to be caught out building your 1,001st dashboard that
Yeah.
that the business might not use when you could have predicted your business's way out of a big problem or identified a new opportunity. So I think data people, whatever kind of data person they are, need to get their head around it for their own career sake and to educate the rest of their business, because who else is going to do that with the right kind of foot in both camps of managing the risks and the opportunities.
And again, for me, when it comes to this evolution, I think we're going to see uh, the democratization of a lot of the domain knowledge that we have have accumulated over time. Uh, the need and desire and interest to continue to learn will just rapidly grow, and AI is going to help a lot of us further our careers in that sense. So there's no ability to turn this off. It's just going to go. So you better get on the train at this point in time and start to learn the stuff. And it's just yeah, it's one of those things that we all figure out. There are some points in our career where we say there are technologies that are defining our careers.
Mm.
I If I was to look at the early tens, it was we were talking about dashboards. Now we're talking more about AI, and this is just the next wave, and better learn it. So, Shaun, before we go, please let us know where can people find maybe you write anything or talk about anything.
Yes, you can find me on the internet. You've probably heard of it. So mostly on LinkedIn. I used to be on Twitter, and world events over the last 6 to 8 years kind of killed Twitter a little bit for me. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on the Dataiku blog. You can even find me on YouTube.
All right.
And my name is relatively unique, so you've got a good chance of finding me without any generative AI.
Thanks so much, Shaun. And again, thank you all for listening here to the Proof of Concept podcast. Please continue to subscribe to us here, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and of course, anywhere you're getting your podcast. Thanks so much, Shaun. Thank you all. Take care and have a great day.
Bye now.